Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life, episode 242. My name is NBZ, and I'm looking at a calendar here, Bally. We are 75 days away from the next Legend of Zelda game being in the world. How does that make you feel?
Excited. I just hope it runs well. That's my main fear. That's just like, there's just so much hype going on with this game, and we are so close, as you say, and I feel like we know absolutely nothing or close to absolutely nothing about that game.
Yeah, it's a blank slate canvas, and as much as I would like to know a bit more, there is one of those things of like, you just go into it not knowing anything. Is it more exciting? Potentially, because you could be let down, you could be, elated. But I'm excited regardless, and I'm excited to play that when I'm in Japan. I think it'll be a fun time. I might not get to binge it as much as I did with the first game, because I remember that like first weekend I was like doing nothing else. That's all I did. I barely ate even food. So yeah, I'll probably not be in that situation.
You cooked more food inside the game than outside the game.
Honestly, that is true. That is a real statement that you could make about it. But hello, Bally, how are you doing? How are things going?
I'm doing well. The family is healthy again, touch wood, for now. So we're not taking special leave at work to look after Bally Jr. Bally Jr. is not getting sent home. He's not making my parents ill, which then means they can't look after him.
Yeah.
All the joys of January and having a baby. But we're doing good. How about you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Not too bad. Been doing some fun stuff recently. Going to be doing some more fun stuff this year. I'm traveling a lot this year, we were just talking about. So it's going to be interesting. And I'm sure I'll have a lot to talk about.
For those who don't know, where are you going? What's happening?
Oh, God, I'm going to San Francisco for GDC. I'm going back to Scotland to do a whole little talk thing. I'm going to Japan for fun. It's going to be a jet-setting year. So lots of stuff to be done. And who knows, maybe there's more in the latter half. I'll probably be going to Germany again for Gamescom as well.
Ooh,
so yeah, I should probably just get my air miles going. That's what I need to do. Get some free flights in there. So
we're not really going as far as that, to be honest. I
don't think you can. You're kind of tied down.
Very tied down.
Nintendo Switch is a good travel companion. So I'm sure we'll be getting a lot of stuff played on planes.
Are you going to bring the Steam Deck and the Switch?
It's a really hard choice, isn't it? Like, what do you do?
Obviously, you're going to bring your Amber in it because that's little. That's just a little guy.
Yeah, exactly. I can fit that anywhere. That's great. Playing Lufia too, wherever I want to go. But yeah, Steam Deck versus Switch of like, what do you bring? Do you bring both? Like,
do you have a carry case for your Steam Deck?
I do. Yeah, it's big, chunky boy. It's so massive. It's very hard to fit in anything, if I'm honest. Like, it's almost like, do I need to have a carry case? It might be easier to just like put it in a slip case or something. Because, but it is a delicate piece of hardware, so you do want to keep it safe. But yeah, it's a question, isn't it? It's like, I guess it depends what I'm playing at the time and like what makes more sense, right? Because if I'm going to Japan, I'm mainly just going to be playing Zelda, so there's not really much point to taking a Steam Deck. But a Steam Deck on a plane that long would be really nice. So yeah, it's a tricky balance to find. Well, I'll figure it out, I'm sure. But we're not here to talk about Steam Decks on planes. We're here to talk about Nintendo Switches in our hands at home and other video game platforms, which we have, some different ones that we're going to be checking out, old Nintendo platforms in a little bit. But Bally, what are we going to be talking about today on the show?
For the first segment, we've got the games that we have been playing, and the second segment, we're going to talk about some emails that you guys wrote in to us with.
Absolutely. We also just want to say a quick shout out to everybody who did the survey that we put out for a couple of episodes there. Thank you everybody for doing that. We'll be going through it and having a look and making some decisions and some choices based on what you have fed back to us. So very much appreciate that. And also just want to shout out, hey, if you're someone who wants some more of this show, we do more of it on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife and you can listen to us talk about various things that are not Nintendo. So games like Hi-Fi Rush, which just came out, we just talked a bunch about on our most recent episode of This Nintendo Life, which is our Patreon exclusive show. Yeah, hell of a game. Very big Nintendo energy that game has.
Definitely recommend that episode if you're interested.
Absolutely. But let's get into things with the video games, what we've been playing. Bally, It came out, the RPG you've been waiting all your life for, or at least the last 5 years for. Octopath Traveler 2 finally dropped. I have not yet picked it up. You have, as a big fan of the first game. And I am being convinced to by various people on Twitter and stuff like that, but I'm still... I think the thing that broke me and made me not want to get it, I'm trying to be a bit better about not getting every single thing day one this year, but also, I watched the IGN review, and the IGN review did bring up grinding a bunch, which was one of my pet peeves from the first game. So I kind of just want to wait a bit and see what more people have to say, and you especially, just to hear from what your thoughts are. But yeah, I know that you've jumped back in and have played a bit more of the game. So what are your thoughts so far?
Yeah, I'm super early. I'm only 4 hours in, so I've only played like a little bit more than everyone else was allowed to play with the demo anyway. And I've done the first chapter of 3 characters: Throne, Temenos, and Oswald. And you had played the Oswald and Temenos first chapter,
yes,
right?
I did.
And they're both pretty strong chapters. Yeah, I think Throne's was strong as well. Like, I think all 3 chapters would be probably in the top half of strong stories from the first game if I had to compare. And like I said before, just the music, I think, does feel like a step up. Honestly, the visuals are probably the biggest step up. I think there's a real dynamic camera to the battles. I think that when you actually compare side by side HD 2D and what it looks like in 2018 versus now, there's a real glow up to like what they've done. I think that the sprites themselves look better, the environments, there's a lot more like clouds drifting over and shadows created in the areas, and just the depth with, like, obviously it's the main strength of HD 2D, I guess. It's like seeing that depth and like your 2D sprites in this deep world. I think it all just looks better, like lighting wise. I think Octopath 1 really went for this quite harsh at times bloom effect, especially in some of like the watery caves in that game. It was like, woof, god, my eyes are like shining and bright by the light. And this game just feels a lot more cohesive and put together. I don't have much more to say. I don't want to spoil all the stories and things, but I do think Oswald's is in particular very strong. I do like the new abilities that the characters have in battle, where it's this meter that builds up whenever you break an enemy or you're hit by an enemy, and all 8 characters have a unique ability, and choosing when and where to use that. So, for example, mentioned last time, but like Throne's ability is have another turn back to back, or Oswald is, rather than using a magic attack that attacks everyone, it focuses all that power onto a single enemy, which is very useful for bosses. And knowing when to use those attacks, I think, could be very crucial, especially with the tougher boss fights in this game. But again, the paths are incredibly linear, and the world is very linear. The map very clearly shows you where leads to where. There's not a whole lot of open exploration that you might get in other JRPGs, and that's fine. They're very much sticking very closely to the formula of the first game so far. And in terms of like you liking the game, MEZ, I mean, I did not have grinding issues with the first game. I know you did. My main issue with the first game was I wanted the stories to come together a bit more, and I've heard enough from reviews to suggest that in part does happen. So that's what I'm looking forward to. So I may be the wrong person to ask if you would like this game or not, but certainly there's other voices out there who were much harsher on the grinding in the first game that might have a different view to me on how it works in the second. So yeah, I think I will enjoy this game very much. I'm skeptical whether you will, but I am absolutely loving it so far. And like I said, I'm only 4 hours in, but hopefully I'll play a good chunk for next time.
I think you mentioned something about like being gated off from going in a certain direction, because I was interested, why did you go up to Oswald? Because it seemed like you were wanting to go south instead. Yeah,
I thought I already know about Oswald from you talking about it, so I might as well try something different. I think I tried this in the first game as well. I think we were on opposite sides of the map, I believe, and we went opposite ways, and that was fun. So yeah, I was like, I'd like to get to Hachette in the south, because I know MEZ has done Temenos and Oswald, and I looked on my map, and you go to like the sewer that's just at the south end of Throne's area, and I just could not get beyond. There was just no clear path letting me get through, and I couldn't work it out. I just could not work out how to get south. So one of our listeners in Discord, they also started with Throne and had exactly the same issue. Could not go south, and they went north to Temenos and Oswald. So I'm intrigued if anyone out there has started with Throne and then gone to Hachette as your second character. And a question for all Octopath Traveler players: is it possible to go clockwise instead of anti-clockwise with these characters? Because I assumed it was, but I certainly wasn't able to with Throne onto Hachette. So Hachette's probably going to be the last character I play as now if I go around in a big circle. But that's fine.
Well, yeah.
It's not a huge deal, but I would have liked a bit more flexibility there.
I don't think you can. I think when you get Oswald, you then have to come back to the mainland, so you can't go up in the kind of top half of the map. Like, you can't keep going around all the way to Hikari the Warrior now. That I don't think that's possible, because the way Oswald's story resolves kind of forces you back onto the main continent. So
right.
I think you will have to...
So which character did you play after Oswald?
I did Temenos.
And after Temenos, who would you have gone to next?
I would have just gone down to Throne, and then I would have gone down. I would have gone down, right? So there must be a way through that. So I don't know.
So you're being forced clockwise. It's interesting. Yeah.
I think you are.
Wait,
yeah.
No, you've been forced clockwise. I've been forced anti-clockwise.
Yeah.
Because I'm making a point that I'm stuck below Throne in the sewers, and you're making a point that you can't go anti-clockwise to... What's he called? Hikari.
Hikari, yeah.
Hikari,
the warrior.
The warrior from Oswald.
Yeah, he's like all the way on the other side of the map. Like, they're the furthest away, it seems like.
Right.
'Cause they are like, there's a big gap at the top where there's no characters. It is like a kind of crescent moon, like on the bottom of the map, essentially.
Right.
So I think you're gonna have to go south eventually. So, but I don't know how you get past that section. Have you looked it up online at all?
I tried a bit and there wasn't enough there, and that's, I guess, to do with the nature that it's not been out very long. But
yeah,
by the time I get stuck and try it, I'm sure there will be a solution. It might have just been like a day-night thing with the sewer.
Oh, could have been, yeah.
I believe the sewer is only open at night, so
right.
I think I had to be night to get into the sewer and go south, but it still didn't. There just wasn't a path.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's very strange. But the fact that someone else on Discord had the same issue makes me think I'm not going mad. So
yeah,
there's
I
something
know
going on.
you can change day and night whenever you want.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that applies to being inside places like the sewers, because the sewers, would that count as a dungeon space potentially?
No, there's no. It's not dungeon, I'd say. But and you can only access the sewer at night, I believe. So right. I don't think you can change it to day.
But could you go into the sewer at night, change it to day while you're in the sewer, and maybe activate something? That's all I'm...
Yeah, maybe. That seems very finicky for what this game is going for. One other gripe I have with the game is I think the side quests are incredibly poorly... And when I say side quests, I mean, like, there are specific characters in towns that have errands for you to do.
Yeah.
There are also joint side quests, which I've not unlocked yet, apparently, later in the game, where you can actually do a quest with two characters together and they interact. So this is very clear. Right,
which seem a bit more narratively focused. Right.
And I look forward to those. I'd quite like to do those. But the kind of individual side quests where it's like, I'm a townsperson and I need this thing, I really am not... I've tried to do... Well, I've not tried that hard because I was under-leveled, but I don't like how unclear they are and how there's not just like... there's not like a menu that just lists all the side quests you need to do and how to do them. There is a menu that says the area, and then within the area it says a list of side quests, but it doesn't say any more on whether it's complete or not, how to do it, where to go to do it. And for a game that is very much waypoints and to go to this place next and being linear and being very clear about where to go, I think that's a bit of a shame. When I might be up for some of those side quests, I'd like to gain some levels, maybe explore the world a bit more, but it just feels a little obtuse compared to what the rest of the game is going for, which I thought is a little bit of a shame, but I might try some of those later.
Yeah, I seem to remember that being a problem with the first game as well. Like, I don't remember doing side quests in the first game, and I think it's partially because they were of that similar design where there's not really a quest log. It's just a list of, like, tasks, and then you just are like, well, how do I actually achieve any of these, right? There's no real understanding there, and, like, going back to the NPCs doesn't really help either because they don't really say anything much.
Exactly.
So... yeah, I think that's kind of something that they've brought over as an issue. But I hope that those more expanded side quests are good ways of gaining levels and actually like doing a bit more narrative stuff at the same time, which would be a good way of mitigating some of the grinding, right? Which is what I hope.
Exactly. But loving it so far. I think the advantage of the first chapters is that you play those first chapters just as the new character, and then they might have a couple of characters within that first chapter that kind of help you out. And I like how focused, and the start of stories are always often strong, in my opinion. Like I just quite like the start of stories and being introduced to what's behind this character's emotions and where their backstory and things. And I think the first 3 chapters have been really strong. So sure, I've got 5 more chapters to play of the first chapters, as it were, but I'm really enjoying it so far. And I really enjoyed the first chapters with the first game as well. It's maybe the second and third and arguably some of the fourth chapters that were a little weaker, but I do think the first chapters generally are stronger.
Yeah, all the setup is always the most interesting part, right? Because
Totally.
you have a goal and you kind of start getting hints at what is potential. It's this question: can they deliver on the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, fingers crossed for that. Sounds good. So yeah, I'll hopefully play it at some point this year and pick it up. But yeah, sounding good so far. I, Bally, have been playing an old game. A little old GBA game by the name of Kururin, a game that I've been interested in for a very long time and obviously dropped on the Switch Online service. And it's a game about a stick. So the stick just spins. It just spins forever and ever. So if you haven't seen this, it's basically it's kind of like a maze game essentially, where this stick is endlessly spinning and you can't control the rate of that spin. What you can control is the speed at which the stick moves, which is helpful for certain things. But for example, say that the stick is spinning clockwise, right? And you have to go round a corner. You're basically moving the stick as it spins clockwise as it goes round the corner in order to kind of navigate those spaces. And if you hit the side of a wall or anything, you take 1 HP damage, and you know, eventually if you take too many hits, you die and you have to restart. Now, the thing with this game is that I think if I had played it as a child on the GBA originally, I would have gotten approximately, 10 levels in and then rage quit and never played it again, because it gets very, very difficult quite quickly. And I think one of the issues is that this was in an era where like smart checkpointing and stuff like that didn't really exist. So what you do come across is, as you're going through these obstacles, you'll eventually get to a point where it's like, oh, there's a heart room. So you get to this heart kind of area, this kind of like checkpointy area, but it doesn't checkpoint you, it just heals you. So you can take a couple of hits, get to that area, full heal yourself, and then go and take on the next challenge. But I think the real trick with this game is not knowing what's coming, right? And because you don't know what's coming, a lot of it becomes trial and error, which means that if you were playing this back on the day on GBA, you would be going, towards an area, get there, and you'd be like, okay, let's go and take on this next challenge. And you'd get hit very quickly and die, and you'd be like, what the hell just happened? I'm going to have to get all the way back there just to see what the next part of the map is, right? And so I think it would cause problems with, you would just get tilted, right? Where you would get to one point and then you would spend so long like getting back to that one point that you would get there, and by the time you're there, you're like, oh, I have another new thing to learn about this stage. And I think that for people who want that kind of hardcore challenge, I mean, you can still do that. It's still possible. However, I took the view that these heart checkpoints here are basically checkpoints, so I'm just going to treat them like that. And that's basically how I played the game, where I wasn't making like endless checkpoints at endless points in time just to like inch my way forward slowly and be perfect about it. But I was being like, okay, every time I get to a heart, I'm going to set a checkpoint here and use that as my starting point, because frankly it would have just taken way longer and would have been way more frustrating otherwise. I do think that there are some stages here that are just like super brutal in a way that you almost need perfect timing in order to get through some sections, and I think that the balancing was just kind of built for a different era, right? An era where people were you know, if they bought a GBA game, they don't want to finish it in 2 hours and be done with it.
Yeah.
And I did take about 2.5-3 hours to finish Kururin, but that's because I was able to kind of place my own checkpoints down and do it that way with save states.
I think how long to beat you had it like 4 hours, so maybe had you not done your own checkpointing method, you probably would have taken about 4 hours. So
yeah, maybe a bit longer than that. It depends, because like the last levels are really difficult. One of the things that is a little annoying for me personally about it is like you get to the end and it doesn't give you credits because they're like, actually you need to go and collect all these fucking birds in the level. I'm like, I'm not fucking doing that. I'm not going back and getting all the birds just for you to give me credit. So I did finish all the levels.
I need my credits.
Yeah, exactly. So I did finish all the levels, but then you just kind of sit there at the end and it feels like a little bit unresolved in a way. So that's just a personal pet peeve of mine, but that's totally cool. I get it. Like they definitely wanted to encourage you to, again, I think, get a bit more time out of this than you would have otherwise, given the nature of the game and the kind of level-based style that it is, and how short it could be otherwise. But I think at a base concept, I just really like it. Like, I do really enjoy it. It's this really fun thing where, you know, obviously you do need to know what's coming a little bit and kind of plan ahead, but you know, there are certain objects in the environment that you can interact with. So springs are a great example where, you know, a spring will change your direction. So if you're spinning clockwise, but the edge of your paddle hits a spring, it will start spinning you the other way. And you get into these really complex things where you're going down a very straight corridor and you want to stay pretty much straight the whole way. So you're basically doing this technique where the top of your paddle hits the spring, you move your paddle up, and as it swings the other way round, the bottom of your paddle hits the spring, and you almost have this like back and forth, like never going too much horizontally, but staying as vertical as you can, essentially, with the stick. Just doing these light taps on the spring as you go up. And more like advanced techniques like that, I think is a really cool thing that this game does, and then utilizes those mechanics quite well throughout. I did find that you do have to use holding down the A button quite a lot to get through certain sections where, you know, if you were just to go at the regular speed, you're not moving quick enough to like make that corner correctly, or to hit that checkpoint or whatever, right? Like there's a necessity almost to using that speed up function in order to get through some of these challenges. And things do get very tricky, right? Like there's a section near the end where they start introducing these rolling spiky balls which will just come out of holes and start moving around. You have to kind of navigate around those. There are some cannons that start firing at you. There's like a bunch of like really tricky spring puzzles that you're kind of going around in a circle to activate a thing and then going back around to kind of get through another area. I mean, it's a great fun game. And I do recommend people check it out, just with a caveat that like you'll probably get frustrated if you go at this the way that the game does it, because, you know, what it does do as well is there's a classic thing of like, you died, okay, I'm going to take you back to the level screen, then you have to press A to start it again, and press A to get past the intro screen to start doing it again. So I often at the very start of every stage, I would just create a save state right at the start as your paddle is spinning, just so that as soon as I died, I'm just like reload save state, done. And that's the best way to do it, the quickest and most efficient way to do it, as opposed to because you want this game to be more of a Super Meat Boy, right? Like ultimately you want it to be like, I died, I'm straight away starting again. But because it was created during an era where those kind of design ethos hadn't been kind of like widespread yet, and technology wasn't really there yet to do that kind of stuff quickly, you can make it yourself. It's a do-it-yourself job, but
definitely a space for a modern version with much faster, better checkpointing and much faster respawning. Like, because it's a great concept. I only did the tutorial area, and I still thought it was really cool. I'd like to get to the rest of this game some point this year, and it's just a cool, bizarre, very Japanese concept, but is really good fun.
Yeah, there was a game called, I can't remember, but it was using a limo. There was a limo that was being used, and I remember Giant Bomb talked about it a bunch, and I can't remember the name of the game. It'll come to me at some point, but that was a game that also took that concept. I think it was in like a kind of crazy taxi format where you're like driving people around, but this limo is endlessly spinning. So I think that there's definitely room for someone to come back to this idea. I think there were other versions of the game as well. There was a GameCube release, I think, in Japan only. So yeah, I'd like to check out some some of those other ones. But the other thing this game has is it has like a bunch of challenge levels as well. So I started playing a few of those also, and those are more bite-sized, which actually works a little bit better because they're much shorter, and so they don't have like the super heavy punishment for dying and then having to just restart all the way back at the beginning, because there are legit some of these levels that take 2 minutes and you need like 2 minutes of perfection in order to get all the way to the end, and these challenge levels are much more like, this will take you about 5 to 10 seconds to do, right? But you just need to absolutely nail it, and you just need to be perfect about it, and yeah, those ones really require you to hold down the A button to just speed up your movement, because you're not going to get the star rating otherwise, because you basically, if you complete it underneath the target time and without being hit by any of the barriers, then you get a star rating on it. So I starred the first section of those levels, and then I started playing a few of them, and I might go back to it every now and again. It is one of those kind of endless gobstopper games where you're like, oh, I just feel like playing a bit of Kuru, and I'll just jump in, and it's a good podcast game before bed. That's how I was playing it mostly, and I really enjoyed it a lot. So now that it's available for more people to try out, I highly recommend giving it a go. It's of the GBA games on there, it's one of the few that I hadn't played, so it's one that was good to tick off the backlog and get through. So check it out. Finally, we played something else as well, cooperatively, a co-op game that came out that was shown in Nintendo Directs multiple times and came out on Switch, and we thought, let's jump in, let's play this short little co-op game. The game is Blanc, which we were like, oh, well, I wonder what country this development team comes from, and then we're like looking up and like, oh, France. I'm like, oh, we're fucking idiots. It's called Blanc. Of course, it's from French people. But Bally, do you want to set up what Blanc is?
Blanc is a little kind of co-op puzzler where one player plays as a little wolf and the other plays as a little deer. One character is black, one character is white. The entire world is black and white, so it's like really going for this unique art style. And you just kind of run along together, and you come across puzzles, and you solve these puzzles, and then keep going. And that's about it. It only took us about maybe 2.5 hours, 2 hours.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
it wasn't too long. And I can't really think of many other games that are this overtly like co-op, like from the same kind of camera perspective necessarily. It's like an incredibly scaled down that takes two perhaps, but it's I didn't really have the best time with this game. I think that the moments where we were just kind of frolicking along in the snow together onto the next point were kind of like the best parts of the game, where we weren't asked to do anything overly specific, and we were just kind of existing in the game world together. I think was kind of the fun bit, and it's fun that the wolf was animated very differently to the deer, and they react very differently on ice and things like that. And there's little areas where you can kind of almost sled down on your body down these areas that were kind of like maybe the best parts of the game, where we were just kind of sledding down these mountain slopes together. And then when we would come across puzzles, all of a sudden the pace very much changes. It's like, right, you have to move this to here and move this to there. And I think for the first few puzzles it felt fine. It
was very simple. It starts very simple, and then you get to a point where it just kind of ramps complexity onto it.
Ramps up so much, and then all of a sudden the camera is going much further out, and the camera's not always keeping up the best, and it's sometimes not very clear what's meant to happen. The input doesn't feel great on certain like elements in the environment, and the whole game just came to a sluggish stop for me, where when the puzzles ramped up and it was one into the next, and the way that we were engaging with the environment just didn't feel fun anymore, and it really dragged on. And it felt like, yes, this game has a good artistic thing that it's going for, but similar to a game like, I don't know, something like Maquette, it's like, it's a great idea on paper, but mechanically the game's just not strong enough. And this game, Blanc, just doesn't feel mechanically strong enough to be a fun game, because you need solid, good feeling mechanics, almost especially in a two-player co-op game where you're interacting with the world in the way you are. Like, it's almost a higher threshold to making the game feel smooth and easy to transition to the next area, and this game just didn't have that, and it kind of flopped in my mind a bit by the end, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more positive on it. I think if I had played it on my own, I would be more in the place you're in. But I think because it was co-op, I was like, well, I'm kind of like, we're kind of suffering through it together, so it almost like makes it more enjoyable in that way, which I thought was all right. But I think the problem it runs into is that, the puzzles that just involve you and me, where you're like, okay, you jump on this thing, I'll jump on your back to get up higher, then I need to stand on this seesaw to bring it over there. Like, some of those opening ones were quite good, because you're looking at the puzzle, you're assessing it, you're figuring out, and the mechanics are built well enough to handle that.
Yes.
Where it runs into stumbling blocks is when it starts introducing other elements, like, other animals, like the geese who we were trailing along with. So there's this mother goose, and she has her 3 kids, and you basically go along with them to try and help them to get through areas. And there's this mechanic they have, this wind mechanic, where, if your character is standing, in front of one of these little goslings, as we discovered, as I discovered anyway, is how you say a little goose is a gosling, apparently, like Ryan fucking Gosling. And you have to protect them from the wind, so you move up this mountain, and there's this little kind of circle that appears like within the sphere of your character. There's like basically a safe space. So if you keep the gosling inside that safe space, then you can get it all the way up to the top of the place, right? And that was fine to begin with. And then we got to this one section where I'm in the middle of this kind of like patch where there are these kind of 2 bushes, and there's a wind that's going sideways, and you're trying to like move them all the way up a certain path, and then they move over to me, and I have to catch them midair and then move them up to this little platform. And I swear to God, we spent like 15 to 20 minutes on this one puzzle, and this is where the game just completely slowed to a halt, because the mechanics were not well built enough to handle what they had presented with it, right? It wasn't accurate enough. It wasn't potentially programmed enough for it to make sense, where like it felt so finicky, and the times in which we did succeed felt like luck more than skill and fluke, essentially. And that I thought would be just, maybe we'd get past that and be fine. But then they introduce this other element where these 2 goats that follow you, and these goats don't really have a clear way in which they control. Like they are kind of mimicking what your character's doing. One of them's black, one of them's white. So like the one that's black is like similar to the wolf, and you're kind of whatever the wolf did, they would mimic. And I thought like, oh, okay, like this could be okay, but
it's a fun idea in theory, but the execution just is lacking.
Right, the AI just isn't good enough to keep up with it, and so you come into these situations where it's like, I want you to just do the thing, and it's not, because there's no clear control. Like, you don't have control over it. You're just kind of hoping that the AI does its job. And does the same thing as you do at the same time. And I think that's where it stumbles the most, is it bites off more than it can chew, in that sense of like, oh, this would be a fun idea, but it feels like they said this would be a fun idea and then didn't think about the practicalities of how to actually make it work from a gameplay perspective. I think that it definitely has those fun moments. Like, I like the fact that it's black and white, and the snow and the way that all works, and as you said, the ice is very fun.
It's a nice environment.
It is, yeah, and the animation is really good. I would say that, like, if you want to play this at a decent performance level, don't play the Switch version, because the frame rate is not very good. Like, we got used to it, and I think it was fine. I didn't mind it that much, but it's a little rough, as 3D indie games tend to be on the Switch. They're not the ideal place to play, but it's really the only online version of this game that Bally and I could play together, because I think it's only on PC and Switch. So obviously you don't have PC, so it wouldn't work that way. So we'd have to go with the Switch version, but I'm always a big fan of co-op games, and there aren't that many out there that we can do that are like this, that are also online. So I enjoyed it just for that fact, I guess, more than anything else. But I do think that it's probably worth waiting on a sale and being like, I'll knock this out in an evening with significant other or a friend or whatever. And I think that probably is the best way to approach it, because It definitely needs a bit of fine tuning and cleaning up and stuff.
I'd say like the first half, up until the geese, I was sitting on a 7 out of 10 or something, and then after that, I probably dropped to like a 6 or a 5, and that's maybe a little harsh, but like I was having a good time, just kind of frolicking along for the most part, like in the snow and the very simple puzzles, and Last of Us, Ellie and Joel, you lift me up here, and I'll do that. Okay, right, I'll come over here, and that was fun, and then really went downhill with the geese. And after that, it was just a bit finicky, and we should say the plot It's incredibly light. I think.
Yeah, it's super simple, very storybook essentially.
Yeah, there's really nothing hard hitting in there. Not that the games like this need something hard hitting.
No, I mean there are moments where I was like, "Oh, are they gonna gonna
do
go
the
there?
thing?
Are they gonna do the thing?" And then they're like, "No, it's fine. They're okay. It's all good." I'm like, "Okay, fine." Like this game's clearly, it's not. It's you might think it's gonna make you cry at the end. Nah, I don't think so. It's not really going for that.
It's not Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons.
No, certainly not. No, although right, like ironically, you could play this like that game, where if you're playing single player, I believe you control each character with the different sticks.
I could not imagine some of those later puzzles with doing that control option. Honestly, I'd go bananas.
Yeah, holy shit. That's why I was thinking like if I was to play this on my own, I think I really would walk away from it way more negative. And I don't think it's the greatest game in the world either. Like I think it has a good deal of problems, but it was fun. I enjoyed my time, so I was pretty happy.
In a world where there's not that many games like this, and we jump in together online and play something together, it is fun. Like it's good. We need more games that do ideas behind Blanc better, I think.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, that was Blanc. The last thing that I want to check in with is a game that I kickstarted a decade ago, I think, at this point, and had been waiting for, I think I've talked about it multiple times on the show, Ghost Song, which was a Kickstarter by a guy called Matt White, who I think I found out about it through Johnny on RFN, who had mentioned it on Twitter, and I clicked through to it, and I was like, well, this sounds exactly up my alley, and I think like back then in 2012, 2013, Metroidvanias were kind of coming back around, like we had Guacamelee and stuff like that, but there weren't that many indie Metroidvanias being made.
Now there's 40 a year.
Exactly. So I think that's one of the issues here, right, is that back then I was like, oh, this looks just like Metroid. I want to get my money behind something like that. And there was an early bird tier. That's how early I was with this Kickstarter, where you could get the game for $10 as opposed to $15 for a limited number of spots. So I just managed to squeeze my way in there for that $10 spot. So that $10 over a decade has eventually paid off in me getting a version of this game. Back then, Bally, they were promising a Wii U version of Ghost Song. Can you guess what happened to that version? Did not come out. So they obviously
you played this on PC.
I did, because I backed it then for just.
But it's also on Switch and other.
It's on Switch, yeah, and it's on everything. And I believe it runs totally cool on every platform. So what is this game? It is it's a Metroidvania, right? And as you said, like things, I think standards have definitely changed in the last few years. Of there have been some big names in the genre. Lots of games doing different things. There are so many you can play so many different types and styles. So many kind of tones as well. Like there are more kind of happy clappy ones like Haiku the Robot, which is one I want to get to. That's like a almost sepia toned but like more bright happy Metroidvania. Or you have like Ender Lilies or Blasphemous, like much more Dark Souls inspired Metroidvanias. So they kind of run the whole gamut. And to be honest, like there aren't actually that many just straight up Metroid ripoffs. Like Ghost Song, like the character is basically Samus. Like they look like Samus. They have a blaster rifle that is the same kind of design as the arm cannon that Samus has. But it is a bit more of a ghostly, as the name suggests, a bit more ethereal, not horror, like maybe edge of horror, but like a bit more a darker tone, I would say, than those games. And again, kind of doing some of the Dark Souls mechanics that you found before. So stuff like in Hollow Knight where you drop all of your currency. Same thing here. If you die, you drop it. But then there's also another harsh element here where if you die, your suit, your kind of your ghost's shell gets chipped away at, and so there's a little bit of like red that eats into your health bar, and every time you die, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So your health bar keeps getting chipped away, and you can only restore that by going to a robot and paying to fix yourself to fix all those repairs.
That sounds like a really fun mechanic.
Oh yeah, super fun, especially when there are about 3 of these robots in the game, and fast traveling to them is a nightmare. So I mean, I started playing this game in November, and I think so here's the thing, I didn't actually finish the game. The screenshot I posted to Twitter of credits is actually fake, because I just clicked the credits on the main screen. Now. Yeah. I clicked credits on the main screen because I was like, I'm just done with this game now, basically. So I'm not going to finish this game. I never will, despite being very excited about it and kickstarting it. But it shows you how much time can change, your perspective on things, and how things, around, if this game had come out I don't know, earlier, even a few years earlier, I think my perspective might have been a bit different. But
it needs to hit that pre-Hollow Knight window, doesn't it?
Sure, yeah, totally. And there are a few things that I think even back then I would have been a little bit, against. Like it feels finicky, right? Like there's kind of a lack of polish to it in a way, in the sense that the movement is fine, but I think it's some of the extra stuff around it. So you have a dash, you have a kind of air dash that's also a ground dash that you can use to dodge through enemies, but it often feels like it doesn't quite achieve what you want to do, like the direction you're facing. Sometimes you'll dash in the opposite direction when you're kind of like in a intense boss fight. You have to be very specific about which way you're turning and facing in order for that to trigger properly. Just like running away from enemies, like enemies generally feel like they have way too much health. Bosses especially are just overloaded sponges, and like the first boss you come across in the game is just like, how am I supposed to beat this thing? Like, it feels unreasonable, the level that I'm at, the amount of stuff that I have to use here to take them down. Now, the thing is, like, mechanically, I think it has some cool ideas, because the idea is your blaster cannon, your arm cannon, heats up. So you do a bunch of shots, and eventually it will overheat and it will get red, and so your shots will slow down and they'll do a bit less damage. And what that means is that you then switch over to a melee weapon, and your melee weapon then has boosted damage from the heat. So, to begin with, you just have your arm cannon, so your arm cannon becomes a melee weapon, so you're shooting a bunch of enemies, overheating, and then you take on the rest of the enemies with your melee. The problem is that these enemies are very finicky, as I said, and so like meleeing them up close, you'll sometimes like try and do it, and then you'll accidentally kind of like clip into them, and then you'll take damage because you're too close because of the melee. So the melee just feels like there's a great idea behind it of like, oh great, overheat the cannon, then the cannon becomes a weapon that does more damage, and then once that's done, you switch back to doing ranged again. And all this works in theory, but given the design of the bosses, like it really doesn't come to fruition because of how little they stay in place, because the bosses are often on the move. For the melee to work, you need them to kind of be standing there for a second in order to make it work. And so often I would find myself just using my cannon, overheating it, and then just waiting for it to cool down, because like it felt too dangerous, and your health is so low and you take so much damage from bosses, it feels like there's no point in risking you going close to them to try and get a few melee hits in, where the likelihood is you're just going to trade blows and take way more damage than you need to otherwise, right? So I think fundamental design problem there just from the bosses. Despite the idea being really good, I think the execution of it isn't all the way there. And yeah, like this other system where your missiles are governed by almost a stamina bar, where you don't have to collect missile packs or anything. Your missiles just recharge, and you don't have to use missiles. You have a variety of different weapons. Like there's one that you throw on the ground, that this little ball that explodes out and does like kind of shards on the ground. There's one that's like just a more powerful kind of laser beam shot. But I just kind of stuck to missiles the whole game because they felt like the most effective, most efficient form of doing things. So I didn't end up experimenting with the kind of badge system that they have. And I feel like because of that kind of stamina system, what ends up happening in boss fights is that you spam your missiles until you overheat. You spam your gun until you overheat, and you just run away, and you just wait, and you're patient, and you dodge. And because of that, these fights take fucking forever. They just take so long. And the reason that I stopped the game was I got to a fight where I felt like I was doing everything perfect. I was like pretty much dodging everything, nailing it, and I got the boss to about half health after 3-4 minutes, and and then just eventually death by 1,000 cuts. Like I slightly get hit once, and there's a bunch of health restoring things I had like 5 health packs that you can just hit one of the trigger buttons and heal yourself back up, but they don't heal a huge amount. And eventually I just died, and I was like, I fought this guy like 5-6 times. I'm like, and this happened multiple times throughout the game, where I was like, I should really keep going with this, right? Because I kickstarted all the way back when. I want to keep going. There's one boss in particular who's this giant fucking yellow ogre who just like drops down out of nowhere, and then like has 1 million HP, like the most HP of anything in the game. And then he just runs away, and so you have to leave the room, come back to respawn him. and that's the way you kill him. Basically, is like slowly leaving, coming back, and you have to keep your health. But you can actually go and reset your health back at the save station. But you shouldn't save, because if you save, it will reset their health bar. But you can just go there and stand there to get your health back up. And then I was just doing this again and again just to try and get rid of him, because if I went to another area that I needed to go to get an essential power up, the wall jump, I would be blocked off by him. But if I made him disappear for a period of time, I could then go south down through this area and it wouldn't block me off anymore. Anyway, it just feels like there are a lot of cool ideas here, but mechanically it fundamentally can't pull them off. The game is just not, it just feels rickety, you know, like it feels like a ladder that's about to break at any second. And, you know, there's moments early in the game where the jump just feels like there are spaces that are designed where I'm like, it doesn't feel like this was well thought out in terms of the jump I'm making, because the jump I'm making is necessitating that my character's head almost hits the ceiling, and then I can't like wiggle in the air enough to make it to the next platform, so I fall on a bunch of spikes and take a bunch of damage, right? Like there's little bits like that where like the air dodge and like the spacing between platforms is the type of thing that you can really appreciate from games like Hollow Knight and Ori, where like every section feels so well thought out in terms of a platforming like design, and it feels like they either just didn't have enough time, or they just didn't like consider those small elements that make those games sing from a polished perspective, of like the little sections where every jump feels like it was intentional, and it's just not the case here. And I think that's, you know, I stuck with it for a good 8-9 hours, and I got through more of the game than, you know, I probably thought I would. I probably should have, yeah. But I'm like, you know, is this really going to, is it worth me pushing through? And the answer was no. So I eventually have finally decided, now's the time, I'm just going to stop, I'm just going to leave it. And I got through most of the game, and I've seen most of it. And, you know, I think it's got some cool stuff going on with it, as I've mentioned, but ultimately it's just a big disappointment, and that's a real shame for something that I've been waiting for near on a decade now. And you know, it's going to happen, you know, and what can you do about it? But yeah, I think the Ghost Song is an interesting thing, and I certainly have seen a lot of people be more positive on it, a lot of people on the internet who like it a lot more than I do, and that's totally cool. So it might be something that you're interested in, but yeah, I do think that for me, it's just like the sponginess of those bosses, like how much fucking health they have compared to how weak you are. It just feels like the odds are stacked against you in a way that's not very enjoyable. And the combat just isn't good enough to justify that, right? I think it's a thing that a lot of these games kind of get wrong about stuff like Dark Souls, where like, you know, I restarted Elden Ring recently, and I beat Margit, you know, pretty quickly, and you know, you can do a good amount to Margit in a short amount of time. He doesn't have an endless health pool. Even if you're not like super high level, like you can take that dude down by just being careful and smart, and you know, it doesn't have an extended like 10-minute boss fight in order to just chip away at health forever and ever. And I think that that's a thing that a game like this could learn, basically, is that you really should balance it a bit more in favor of the player in some of these.
You're right about Margit, where it can be a balance where you can be a glass cannon, and as long as you're careful about your health, you've got enough power to take them down. And if Margit themselves are just too bulky and take too long to take, then that balance, as you say, just evaporates and doesn't work.
Yeah, totally. So
well done for not beating it, because I think in the old days of TNL, we would really bang our heads up against a brick wall beating games similar to this one, it sounds like, and maybe not have the best time. So we need to become better at being like, you know what, this game just isn't quite cutting the mustard, so let's not push ourselves to finish it. Yeah,
totally. And you know, I think I played enough of it to where I'm like, I'm put it on my list for this year, because I put 9 hours into it, right? Like, and I don't always do that with games, but I think it's I beat it on my own terms, which is walking away from it. So that's it.
Yeah.
So there you go. Cool. Well, that is going to do us for the first part of today's show. We'll be back after the break, where we shall be taking your emails and answering them and saying things about them. And I don't know why I'm doing this voice, but I am anyway. I'll see you next segment. Goodbye.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the second part of today's show. It is time for emails. They are back and they're back with a vengeance, but we are low on emails, MBZ, and I would like to put out a call. We always need more, but particularly right now, we need some more emails. A lot of stuff going on, writing about, I don't know, job layoffs at Giant Bomb or something. Let me know your thoughts. You know, we can talk about that. We can talk about anything going on. We want to hear your thoughts, your comments, your questions. So if you have any of those things, please email ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. There's also a channel in our Discord server called Emails. You can join our Discord server. You can post a comment, a question over there, and we would very much appreciate that. We can read that out on the show as well. But first, our first email, I should say, is from B King, who is from Sweden. Says, "Hey guys, it's been a while since I last wrote in, but it dawned on me that at this point in time, it has already been 6 years since I first discovered your podcast and wrote in for the first time. It was ahead of the launch of the Switch and the release of Breath of the Wild when I properly got back into gaming and started listening to podcasts on my commute. Ever since that time, your podcast continues to be my favorite gaming-related podcast, and I'll always look forward to listening to your discussions on all things Nintendo and non-Tendo as soon as I receive notification of a new episode release. Anyway, since my first ever question I wrote in was about what items from previous Zelda games you would have liked to see in Breath of the Wild, I thought to ask you the same question now ahead of the release of Tears of the Kingdom. Are there some items you missed in Breath of the Wild that maybe could spice up the combat or be used for puzzle solving? Keep up the good work. Greetings from Sweden."
Thanks so much, B King. I appreciate it. And
what did we say last time, I wonder?
I don't know. You know, maybe someone can go back into the archives and figure out. But yeah, I think that there was a lot of expectation going into like Breath of the Wild of like what it would do, and I think it kind of like bucked so many trends in terms of, you know, the items were just a set of tools, right? There was a totally different approach, and there were fewer of them, but they were more flexible. You know, using the Sheikah slate to use magnesis to do stuff, which ironically already originated in a previous Zelda games in Oracle of Seasons, I believe, where you have the magnet item, and that magnet kind of, you know, it's nowhere near as flexible as magnesis in Breath of the Wild, so they clearly took it to another level. But you know, the idea of a magnet item had existed in a Zelda game before, and I recall going back to that game and being like, oh shit, this is the origin of where magnesis really came from. So in some ways, like they took an old item, but they just put a new twist on it, and were able to kind of breathe a bit of fresh air into it, so I think there's a lot of stuff that they could do in that sense, and it feels like, you know, looking at the trailers and everything, we have this arm instead, right? And so this arm is our functioning toolkit, or like maybe ability to lift. Maybe the arm is just a telekinesis thing and that's all it does, but there seems to be other abilities like being able to like warp through spaces by turning into a teardroplet or whatever, coming from the ground to the sky, and like there are different like things that he has on his arm, like that big kind of dragon flame thing that he had at one point in one of the earlier trailers. So I don't know what the approach is going to be to items in this game and how they're going to work, but Bally, do you have any kind of classic Zelda items that you would love to see return, and maybe think of like what the spin would be on it for this new type of Zelda?
So we saw the kind of cart thing that Link had, where he's like driving across Hyrule Field on this, it's basically just a plate with 4 wheels. Why didn't you just forget about the engine, and why don't you stick a swift sail on that thing, and you can just like sail across Hyrule Field, just some sort of mechanic. And then why don't you throw in on top of that an item like the Gust Bellows from Skyward Sword, or you could have the Gust Jar from Minish Cap. It's kind of similar. I think Gust Jar is a bit more, it has a larger impact on the world around you. Like it creates a larger gust, as it were, because you could combine that with the Swift Sail and sort of self-propel yourself across Hyrule Field or something. I think that could be cool. But likewise, I think the Gust Jar generally in dungeons, the world around you, it's a really cool idea where you can like suck and push all this air from one. You can take something from one enemy, put it away, like spit it out over on the other side of it, of somewhere. Like I think there's a lot you could do with that, where you have to be careful with Tears of the Kingdom if it's like Breath of the Wild, where it's not items per dungeon, as it were. I mean, maybe Tears of the Kingdom changes that. Who knows? Maybe there are going to be item-specific dungeons. Who knows? But I think something like the Gust Jar is versatile enough where you could mix it up a bit.
I think, yeah, like if you are collecting air and then shooting it out, like just knocking enemies off cliffs is a great thing that you can do. You can kind of do that with the Deku Leaf already in Breath of the Wild. Like, they have that element, which I guess the Deku Leaf originally in Wind Waker also had a bit of a kind of air-based element to it, right? So I think this idea has been in a few different games, and, you know, Breath of the Wild has it as well. But I the Gust Bellows, I seem to recall mainly being used to suck stuff up, and less so for pushing. So I think some of the enemies.
I think the opposite. I think they were more for blowing sand away in that.
Is it more
dungeon.
blowing? Because I guess it is blowing as opposed to sucking it up, isn't it? It's like kind of creating space, though, right? Like it's
right.
pushing air
it's
out
like
to
discovering
create space.
stuff under the sand by blowing away the sand. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you don't suck it up, do you? You do just kind of blow, and it kind of moves out of the way.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a fun one, and I think on a Swift Sail note, like, probably better to do that with an aerial vehicle, right? An airship almost,
right?
Exactly. Is what you'd want to create in that sense.
But it could be used for both. I think that's really cool. Like, it could be, you could just, if it's one more part that you can just add on to your Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts kind of contraptions, then yeah, I'd love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, on that same note, you could take the spinner from Twilight Princess and, you know, use it on vehicles. You know, have that be.
What if they had like a little space for the spinner, and to spin was basically powering the vehicle?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's the engine essentially that you rev up. I did want them in like Breath of the Wild as DLC stuff. Obviously, they gave the motorcycle, which was great. But I was like, you could just give us the spinner and make it good this time in terms of like traversing over the environment. Because that's the one disappointment of Twilight Princess is like, okay, the spinner's really cool, but you have to have momentum in like specific spots to use it. Like the very few places in the overworld where you have a couple of puzzles with it, but also like just mainly Arbiter's Grounds is where it's used, where you're on rails, kind of like jumping between stuff.
There's a handful of areas in it's not open world, but the world where they do have those what did you call them, the
puzzle kind of areas, spinner puzzle sections,
they got the rails, as it were, but they're not frequent at all.
Yeah, and the problem is that when you just jump on the spinner randomly in the middle of Hyrule Field, it kind of goes for a little bit and then just dies and stops. And so, like,
they very much did it on purpose to stop you sailing across Hyrule Field, didn't they? Like, it was very much, we want you to use this on the rails, and if not, then get lost.
But the ideology of Breath of the Wild is like, break shit, man. Like that the very idea of the game is like, just go faster than the world can let you, and a lot of speedrunners have done that, where like you go so fast that the game freezes to load the rest of it as they're like being tossed through the air at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So like, I feel like people could do some real glitch stuff with the spinner to make it so that you kind of shoot across the planes. I think it would be good. But yeah, like the kind of mechanical workings of it make it feel like something that would work pretty well with this whole vehicle building stuff that is being introduced. And I would like to see that. But again, I think the problem with the spinner is it feels so limited in what you can do with it. Like, it's kind of and this I think is an issue with a lot of Twilight Princess items. Like, they're super cool, but they have such specific use cases that they don't have the flexibility of other items in other Zelda games, right? So
it's almost like the fact that they are specific to dungeons allows the developer to make them even more unusual and cool. You know, Spinner's a great example because it is so unique to that dungeon and is such a crucial part of it that I think they just get concerned about, but how will that work in the rest of the game, kind of thing. And hopefully Tears of the Kingdom can change that. Right, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, on that similar note of moving fast across the world, Pegasus boots have always been a big thing in classic Zelda games. However, they are called Pegasus boots, right? And that implies a certain thing, which is flight, as opposed to speed. So, like, what if they brought in the Pegasus boots, but they had little wings on them, and you basically turned into Hermes, and that's how you just fly as Link throughout the world.
They've never been in a 3D Zelda, have they? The Pegasus boots?
I don't think they have. No, I'm pretty sure though.
There were what were the boots that allowed you to walk on air in Ocarina of Time?
Oh, right, like the invisibility kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, those had like I don't know if they were referred to as Pegasus boots, but that is kind of...
might have been. It's really changing the concept a bit.
Yeah, exactly. It basically lets you kind of like hover over, mid-air essentially for a period of time before it disappears, and then you kind of drop down. But yeah, I mean, Pegasus boots has always been like a kind of 2D Zelda tactic to get quickly from screen to screen, right?
Yes.
And yeah, you don't really see that in the 3D games. So I think if you're going to bring it into a 3D game, one which already has implications of, first of all, Link shooting from the ground up to the sky and like zooming, like morphing through concrete up onto a platform, as well as like vehicles' ability to fly. I think like a good end game item would be Pegasus boots that you find that you can then just fly anywhere as just Link on his own, just with his little wings going on his feet, and that's how he flies everywhere.
Right.
That could be quite cool. Maybe pairing it with some just regular wings as well. Who knows? That could be a fun thing to do.
One of my favorite things in Breath of the Wild was the memories, where you get this image and you have to go to a very specific part of the map where you can see that image, and then there'll be a memory, and then you do the cutscene, etc. It's very satisfying finding those areas. I want them to bring back the Picto box from Wind Waker.
Okay.
And rather than have a bajillion Koroks scattered through the like 900 odd or whatever, I don't care about that. I want the extra long crazy person need to play more Zelda for a 200 hours mission to be, you need to find all these. It'll be like memories, or it'll basically be. So, if for those who don't know, the Picto box is an item in Wind Waker, and there's a photographer guy with a shop, and he gives you this challenge of like, you need to go into the world and take pictures of things, and then you unlock this figurine vault, and you take pictures of things like enemies to the guy, and he will give you a figurine for the picture of that enemy that you took, and then you can collect I think it's like 100 or something, 150 figurines. There's a lot of figurines.
It's a lot of stuff, especially because bosses count for it, and so if you miss the boss, I mean, if you miss the boss, you can technically do it on the refight when there's a boss rush at the end, right? But it's tricky because there are missables in that.
Exactly.
Like, you can miss stuff out.
You have to like replay the game, and that it kind of all the save files linked together in a way, and that's how you get all the figurines. But I want that to be brought into Tears of the Kingdom, but to forget all the enemies and just focus on vistas, a bit like the memories. So like, we know that open world in Breath of the Wild is so perfectly designed. Like, it's very specifically designed. This links to that. Like, there's a real look to it. There's thought behind every corner, like Disney World. And I think my point is that Nintendo can get more out of that world by giving more reasons for players to get to these vistas and points and take pictures, get them back to this potential Picto box guy. I just want there to be an NPC in the game who's just passionate about pictures and vistas and paintings or something.
Like they have a museum, basically.
They have a museum of all these incredible areas in the game, exactly.
Yeah.
And your task is to go to locations and take incredible pictures. Throw in the fact that Tears of the Kingdom has got a lot of stuff in the sky. Like, there might be quests where you need to take an incredible picture of, say, Hyrule Castle from the sky, and just, I think it's just a really cool side questy sort of thing that would be awesome for Tears of the Kingdom, because I thought the memories, as great as they were, there weren't actually that many of them, and I think just something that embraces the beauty and design of that world a bit more, I'd personally love to see.
I love that idea. That's really, really good, especially like having a museum. Like you could basically take Blathers from Animal Crossing and put them into Zelda.
Yes.
or like have a nod to that where like the museum is in the sky and the curator of the museum is like an owl NPC.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think,
and this could be like
cool.
end, this is post game stuff, but it could be introduced to you like at the end game, it doesn't have to be but I just think something that is a bit more less frustrating and boring than discovering 900 Koroks is what I'd hope for in some sort of post game that this game might have. Who knows?
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I love that as a concept. That's really cool. I mean, not similar lines, but like I've always been a huge proponent of the beetle from Skyward Sword.
I was about to say the beetle. I love the beetle.
The beetle's fantastic,
it's
and
so cool.
I think that you can do some great like scouting with that thing, right? And I think that Breath of the Wild is a game that does so well from planning enemy encounters and all those types of elements. So like having the beetle as this multi-tool that can go and plant stuff, right? So for example, you could pick up a bomb with the beetle, place it somewhere that can then be remotely detonated, you know, to start a chain reaction. Like basically use it as a drone tool to kind of like figure out what's going on, as like the lay of the land, as well as like use it to carry and place things, and just basically be like a kind of spy setup tool essentially, but also like with the sky and going between islands, like sending it out on a mission to be like, is it worth me jumping over to get to that island, or should I stay on this one, should I go to another one? Like I think it has a lot of potential for doing that, and like you could potentially upgrade it as well to like go further and all that sort of stuff, because you know I think there has to be a bit of a limitation on it. You know, I think about like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I played a lot of, and the eagle in that game kind of acts in a similar way, but feels a bit more overpowered in the sense that you can kind of just go forever with the eagle and just like go as far as you want and like just mark every enemy possible, and it feels like it needs to be like similar to that, but with a bit more functionality for like doing stuff, and maybe like held back a little bit. But yeah, I think the beetle could be retrofitted into you know, Tears of the Kingdom to make sense and be something that's good, or even like if you're underground in caves, stuff like that, like be like a light or like a torch essentially that you can kind of send through and be able to find stuff. And I think the kind of blending of technology in this game with kind of you know, regular sword and board is something that the beetle would fit into pretty well.
Very much so. Fits perfectly in.
I think it works.
Do you lose any of the wonder of discovery on foot when you might have pre-discovered the area, flying a little beetle over the area?
Yeah, that's definitely a danger.
But maybe that doesn't matter in Tears of the Kingdom because a lot of the world is one we've already seen.
That's true. Yeah, it's true. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's one that could potentially work and come back. But yeah, we'll have to see.
Time stones.
Time stones. Yeah.
I don't know how they would best fit, but I just thought they were so cool in Skyward Sword, and especially since, I mean, loads of Zelda's focus on time, but you know, there's a big emphasis in Breath of the Wild on you're playing in the post-apocalypse and you're referencing the pre-apocalypse, and something like, imagine having a time stone on the back of Epona or your horse or whatever, and you're riding through Hyrule Field, and as you're riding along, guardians are waking up and then disappearing as it's referencing the past. You know what I mean? Or something like that. There's something really cool and cinematic in there that they could do that references the story beats of the past and future and kind of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be puzzle related. It could just be spectacle. I don't know. There's something cool they could do there.
Yeah, I mean, Breath of the Wild generally like was a game about the past, right, and about relitigating what happened. So I think mechanically it would work here and would make sense. And I think we're going to be delving into more of that stuff in the actual game. So yeah, it would. I don't know how it would work if you were to kind of take that mechanic and make it more of a kind of active thing the player was able to do whenever and wherever. That would be kind of nuts, because then you could do it like anywhere across the world, and I think that would be probably a bit of an insane thing, but that would be amazing if they're able to make it work. There are definitely items, I think, in the series that are very like specific, and they don't tend to do a lot outside of those specific things, and I feel like you can kind of expand on those, right? Like, I don't know what you would do with it, but I feel like Link should have a cane or a rod of some type to do some kind of magic shit. And I don't know what that is, but this is kind of like a kind of amalgamation of like the cane of Burner from Link to the Past with where it like creates the blocks, and like the Dominion rod that controls things. Like some sort of cane, some kind of magic wand, I feel is necessary. And I don't know what it would do, but I feel like that's something that could be cool in this game. I don't know. I like the idea.
You did have the fire rods and ice rods in the first game.
That's true.
They're very simple, just do fire and ice. But definitely room for more rods. Yeah,
I guess those ones are more about like control, right? And like taking control. I think if you were to do the Dominion rod, it would have to be more applicable across enemies, where like you activate it, and then whoop, all of a sudden you're playing as the enemy, right? Like that'd be great, right?
Cool, yeah.
Because I remember using Dominion.
Maybe Mario Odyssey in there.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's basically like Cappy essentially at that point in time, where you just Dominion Rod into an enemy and you start like moving around as them and like, you know, messing up things with their friends and all that sort of stuff. Like that seems like a huge fucking amount of programming work to be able to control every enemy in the game. But like, wow, I think that would be a great like. Because Dominion Rod was a great idea, but it was just like, well, I have to do it on these dumb statues every time, and
it was a little bit akin to the spinner in some senses, like very
pretty
specific.
much.
I do think I think it's the Sand Rod in Link Between Worlds. I'd love to see that in a 3D space. Like imagine a big boss fight in an open sand area, and you're casting like a big wall of sand to like say it's like a traditional boss that kind of runs around, and you have to create a wall of sand for it to run into to then stun it, and then you do your sword attacks or whatever. Just pretty simple Zelda design, but just I think in a 3D space, something like that. You can do the same with like water and ice. I know that you've got the what do you call the ice?
The name it's like the freeze rune.
Cryosis.
Yes.
Yeah. So something like that, but just a bit more fluid and rod like.
Yeah, no, that would be neat.
You could just keep going. Do you think these are the discussions that they must have? Like,
oh man,
when they're
yeah,
developing this game, and
absolutely.
they must have just thousands of ideas that don't make it, obviously, but
there are tons.
Must be
there's
crazy
so many
stuff in there.
There's so many items just across the series history, right? Like, is a hook shot just like not needed anymore, right? Because of all the other stuff that you have in this game. Because I was like, well, would you put the hook shot in Tears of the Kingdom? I don't know. If you can just fucking fly through the air now, like, is it necessary to be like a kind of like subpar Spider-Man with hook shots, you know? I think that because of the spaces, right, and like the gap between these islands, it all feels so much more built around obviously the glider and getting to places there, but also just having this machinery to kind of ferry you between those spaces, as opposed to like a hook shot that can only reach so far and wouldn't really be helpful to kind of like get you across, you know? I don't know. I don't think that's one that actually kind of works in Tears of the Kingdom. I think it feels a bit more limiting as a thing. I always loved the ball and chain. I think Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword are good for this because they have so many different like weird ones. Ball and chain is just like ball and chain to me almost feels like just a weapon you would find on the ground in Breath of the Wild, though, right? Like it's like, oh, here's this just giant heavy thing that I can now use. So I wouldn't be surprised if that just ended up being just like a regular weapon you can get from enemies, right? That almost makes a bit more sense because it was really built for specific puzzles in Twilight Princess that required like something powerful to break a wall, but I don't think that's the design ethos of something like these new Zelda games, because they want you to be able to break that wall in 7 different ways using 7 different methods, right? So like the ball of the chain could be one of those, but it would be alongside bombs and fire arrows triggering some explosion and all that other stuff as well. There's lots of stuff. Any last ones you want to shout out, Bally?
Oh, I'm all out. We can keep going for hours. I'm
can,
sure.
Yeah. I do like the hammer from Link Between Worlds that lets you kind of spring up to places. Like how do you implement that into 3D? Again, a hammer could just be a big weapon, you know. I think some of these past items removed from the context of their game, so like, that probably just could be a weapon, I guess, because they don't have like specific things that they could do within the world. But thank you, B-King, for the question. Very good stuff.
Staying with Tears of the Kingdom, Dave97 on Discord says, do you think The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom will face stiff competition from games like Starfield among the various Game of the Year award shows and outlets?
Yeah.
What's winning Game of the Year?
Oh my goodness. I mean, if I was to have a gun to my head right now, I would say Tears of the Kingdom, probably.
And what are its biggest contenders?
Man, like, the thing is, right, the type of game that Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild are the type of game that it feels like everybody wants. And from what I've seen from Starfield, it feels like the type of game that, like, will probably sell very well to a broad audience, but is it what everybody wants? You know, like, that's the question that I have, is like, for a game like Starfield, it's so much more reliant on traditional narrative and, you know, traditional kind of open world mechanics, a lot of shooting guns. Like, is there going to really be any flexibility there? Obviously, Bethesda have a history of, like, you know, Skyrim has a level of what Breath of the Wild does. Like, there's a level of kind of like flexibility with its systems of stuff like, grabbing a bucket and putting it over a shopkeeper's head, and then you can take all their items because they can't see you, right? Like, stuff like that is really funny, and I think that the games that Bethesda makes allows for those types of things where you can just drop a coin on the ground and you can come back to it 20 hours later and that coin is still there on the ground, right? Like, stuff that is persistent within a world. And if Starfield leans into that in a way that really works, then I think that definitely has a possibility to kind of get people more interested. But it has been a long time since Bethesda made a game that everybody loved as well, right? There's a real kind of shakiness on the ground.
Well, Hi-Fi Rush was just last week, though.
Sure. I mean, Tango and the Bethesda themselves is slight separation, but I totally get what you mean. Like, there's a worry there, though, I think, from a lot of people of their ability to put out a huge open world thing, which apparently has like hundreds of planets in it that are all fully explorable and all that sort of stuff. Like, there's a real ambition here, and it maybe feels like they're biting off more than they can chew with like all the stuff they're attempting to do here, right? Are there any other like big games coming out this year that are really in the same space? Because I'm not sure there are, really.
I mean, different types of games, but I think that the more traditional cinematic narrative two big hitters for the year that have a chance, because games like obviously Last of Us Part 2 won, I think are Jedi Survivor and Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
I still think Tears of the Kingdom will probably beat both of those in the same way that a game like Elden Ring beat God of War, where I think there's something about the more innovative open world. Like, if you want to put together your award-winning game, I think, yes, Last of Us Part 2 is up there, but I think the type of game that Elden Ring is actually trumps that formula.
I think so. If Elden Ring released in the same year as Last of Us Part 2, I think Elden Ring wins Game of the Year. Yeah,
and I think that Tears of the Kingdom will fall closer into that Elden Ring camp, and as a result, and on paper, in theory, should beat out games like Spider-Man 2 and Jedi Survivor, as good as I'm sure those games might be. I think my fear for Tears of the Kingdom is like if this game just doesn't run well and gets hammered for that, like it's when we see what you're doing in that game, it's biting off so much. But if there is one developer who can make insane ideas work well with less hardware, it's definitely Nintendo. So I don't put it past them. I think one of my predictions was that it would run really well. I don't have faith in that prediction, but there's a chance that it will run very well and be a smooth 30. And if it does, I think that it's got a lot going for it to take Game of the Year. Maybe Final Fantasy 16 I'd throw in there.
Sure. Yeah. I think the interesting thing about that is it's definitely going to be more narrative focused from because everyone praises the 14 story so much, right? And that's the team who are making 16. It feels like that's the thing that a lot of people are looking forward to with this game. It also feels quite like the Final Fantasy game series has evolved a lot and always has different combat system every single outing, and it feels like the more and more it's evolved in the modern era, the less and less it's become a traditional RPG in the turn-based sense, right? Because 15 was action-based combat, and this is basically Devil May Cry. I believe they hired a former Devil May Cry combat guy from Capcom onto the 16 team, and I think that's certainly showing in terms of what we've seen so far from the combat that's going on in that game. Final Fantasy has been through some rough patches and has certainly had its fair share of kind of development troubles, like 15 being a prime example of a game that was initially something completely different that then just had to be cobbled together into what eventually became Final Fantasy 15. Whereas this feels like from the ground up it's been built to be something, deliberate and hasn't had as much of an trouble development from what we've seen anyway, or from what we've heard, and it feels like the team behind it are a team that kind of know a bit more what they're doing. So I think that it will be good, but I do still think that it doesn't speak to a wide enough audience. It speaks to a big audience, but there's still people who will much prefer to play stuff like Zelda and Starfield as opposed to Final Fantasy, just because of the fantasy element there and the kind of Japanese leaning that game has. So I think it will be very good. The question is how good, and will will Zelda just kind of walk it this year? Do you think there's a possibility of that? Because I think for me, oftentimes, the real interesting games, the ones that I think should win, never do, because they're all independent games, right? Like, you know, it's totally. So rare to have one of those games. You know, for example, stuff like Citizen Sleeper, Pentiment, Tunic last year were all better than a lot of the big games that came out, and yet didn't get in any of those, you know, awards celebrations. And like, is there going to be an indie game that comes out this year that I think is better than Tears of the Kingdom? There's a likelihood, there's a chance, it's definitely possible, but I don't think that when it comes to the big stage of big outlets giving out awards and stuff like that, that they will ever lean in that direction, just because most people, you know, and we talked about this before, like, Game of the Year tends to be a popularity contest because it has to be an amalgamation of multiple people, or all individuals who have all individually played things, and most of those individuals would have played most of the big things versus the small things, which is why it's hard to get smaller games to win these awards. And the only reason stuff like Celeste and Hades made it is because they broke through to such an extent that everyone was playing them, right?
And I'd love it if something like Silksong could do that this year. I think it has a chance. But
now that's an interesting point. That's a very interesting point. And probably the only indie game, you know, announced right now that has a shot of taking down Zelda.
That we know of, yeah. I mean, it's hard to stealth release an indie game in the same way, I guess. But
of course.
It's the most likely. Right.
Yeah.
Gun to your head, what are the 6 TGA Game of the Year nominations?
Oh,
do you want me to go first?
Sure, go for it. Okay.
Tears of the Kingdom, Spider-Man 2, Jedi Survivor, Final Fantasy 16, Starfield, and Hogwarts Legacy.
Oh my god, that is so depressing.
You know I'm right.
Holy shit, that is so depressing.
But I'm right.
But it's probably correct. Yeah, I mean, from the stuff that we know about right now.
Yeah,
right?
I've not put in Forza Motorsport, but I know Horizon got shafted the other year, so I'd be surprised if Forza Motorsport could get in there. But maybe you could sub that in for Hogwarts Legacy.
God, if Hogwarts Legacy is in the fucking Game of the Year list, like, Jesus fucking Christ. Oh my God. I mean, you know, aside from all the, you know, controversy and everything, just like the game itself sounds like the most mediocre fucking thing I've ever heard of. So like, wow, that would be extremely rough. I mean, like, again, if Hi-Fi Rush isn't in there, then I'm just going to be annoyed anyway. Yeah, no, you know,
that's fair.
Like,
I could also sub out Hogwarts Legacy for Hi-Fi Rush. Yeah, that's the slot.
Yeah, I honestly do think that Hi-Fi Rush will make it over Hogwarts Legacy, but
would you have the same 6 otherwise?
I think, like, it's probably going to be, because, like, as we've done this so many times, what I have learned is that the boring games are always going to be the ones that get on there, right?
The sequels, the AAA, the whiz-bang.
Exactly. It's just going to happen. It's inevitable. So, you know, I think that will probably likely be, you know, if Spider-Man comes out, it will be on there, right? Like, it's just kind of guaranteed. It's kind of guaranteed a spot. So, yeah. Starfield could flop. You know, if Starfield's a terrible game, then it probably won't make it, right?
I think it could get low 80s and still be in that top 6.
Yeah, I guess.
Unfortunately,
yeah, I guess so.
If it gets below that, I'd be shocked if it got in the top 6. But you never know.
Well, we'll see. It's going to be an interesting one. There's a lot of big games coming out this year. Already has been quite a few have dropped.
But in short, I do think Tears of the Kingdom is romping home to loads of wins, including the TGA. So it's going to happen.
It's. I think, especially after that last trailer, like, the vehicle stuff feels like such a big thing that already is kind of setting it a little bit more apart from Breath of the Wild than I think we were expecting. So I think that is going to be you know, a big factor for sure.
Our final questions from Capsule J, and this one's on Discord, says, which do you think will come out first, Metroid Prime 4 or Metroid 6?
Oh boy, I mean, you know which one I want to come out first, but I'm not sure I have the agreement of the majority of the internet alongside me. I think, honestly, like, with Prime Remastered coming out, to me that says we're ramping up to talk about Prime 4, right? Like, I think like the idea that Prime Remastered has been kicking around for so long, and people like Jeff Grubb have been talking about how this has been in the works for ages and ages, and has kind of been sitting around like Nintendo tend to do recently, of like they finish a game, they're like, nah, we'll just wait until it's an opportune moment. And so there has to be a reason why they now decided to release Prime Remastered, right? Like, I mean, part of it is that we're in the kind of end of the Switch's life cycle, and so they're probably padding things out a little bit.
When you've had the last 5 years, why wait till now, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But like, they want to capitalize on excitement around the idea of Metroid Prime, right? That's the whole marketing strategy behind putting out a remake like this, especially when you already have a sequel announced, is build excitement around, you know, introduce people to the series who have not played it before, because it has been 20 years since the game came out originally, or at least the series started, and it's been at least over a decade since people have really been able to play a new entry in the series. So like, the idea that Metroid Prime 4 is not close to being revealed in some state is, it feels like it's inevitable to me, right? Like, it feels like at E3 this year, or whatever Nintendo do, because they're not going to be at E3, but whatever presentation they do around the summer has to have some Metroid Prime 4 component to it in some way, because otherwise it just feels a bit off that they would just release this and then not do anything else with Metroid Prime 4. And it's been so long. It's been 4 years since they rebooted development, right? Because they announced it in 2017. They rebooted development around February this time. They put that video on YouTube being like, hey guys, sorry about this. We're changing developers. That was 2019. We're now in 2023. It's been 4 years since Retro Studios have started work on Metroid Prime 4. And we have seen nothing. Absolutely zero. So, you know, I know development times are getting longer and longer, and they probably had to scrap a bunch of stuff that was done originally on their first iteration of the game, but it feels like now would be the time where they start talking about it. And so that, combined with the fact that they put out Metroid Prime Remastered, feels like, okay, they're at least going to start talking about it this year. The question is, does it come out before Mercury Steam are able to turn around a sequel to Metroid Dread? And like, I don't know, it feels like Dread did in itself take a long time, because Samus Returns was 2017 and Dread was 2021, so that was 4 years in and of its own right. So it feels like if they're going to do another game in the Metroid 2D saga, then I think it still probably comes out like 2025, right? Like, that's when I would expect to hear or see one of those. So I do actually think that despite all the memes around Metroid Prime 4, it is more likely that Prime 4 comes out before Metroid 6. I do still stand by that. How do you feel, Bally?
Well, obviously Metroid Prime 4 is in the narrative lineage of Metroid Prime, and Metroid 6 is in the narrative lineage of Metroid Fusion. So the obvious thing in my mind is that these games are coming out on the same day, just like Metroid Fusion and Metroid Prime.
Of course,
that's the obvious thing.
Has to happen.
But I think in reality, you're probably right. I think Metroid Prime 4, we are in the build-up to it, and that is, as you say, the reason why Prime Remastered came out now. I think it will be less than 4 years between Dread and Metroid 6, but I think that still puts Prime 4 ahead of Metroid 6. So, yeah, interesting. And I think our vague predictions were that we might get the next Switch next year, and I'm still convinced Metroid Prime 4 might just come out on both the old Switch and the new Switch, but I think Metroid 6 is beyond even that launch. Like, I think it's later. So, yeah, Metroid Prime 4.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue, again, as you said, like, because they have the kind of infrastructure set up for Dread and, you know, everything that they did with that game, that there could be a quicker turnaround time on it, especially because, you know, they did a remake, then they made a brand new game, and now they're going to make another, presumably another brand new game, given how well Dread did and how people received it. Like, there is almost an argument for them to come out in the same year, right? Like, is 2024 the year, like end of 2024, the year that we see both of these games happen? In which case I would be delighted. That would be great for everybody. But
they could come out the same year, even if it's not the same day. You're
totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's a possibility. But I don't know, Nintendo tend to me it feels like they tend to like to space out games within the same series over different years. Because you don't want to have, like, I mean, I don't know, actually, if I...
Unless you're Kirby and you get 3 games in the same
Exactly. Yes, Kirby's the one example where that is no rules apply to him whatsoever. But, like, I guess, like, Warriors 3 Hopes was announced alongside us knowing about Engage, maybe, I think. I think both were known about at the same time, but one came out, like, the end or, like, the middle of one year, and one came out at the start of the next year. So... there's a proximity there, but it's still within 2 different calendar years. So maybe it's the case that Prime 4 comes out November 24 and Metroid 6, whatever it is, comes out March 25, right? Like, they're within a 4-month period of each other, so they are close, but they are split across calendar years. Just from a kind of marketing perspective, I think that might be something Nintendo would want to do. But yeah, I don't know. Which are you more excited for, Bally?
I'm more excited for Metroid Prime 4, I think.
Even after all the like years of development hell and troubles, you're still looking forward to it?
Yeah, I mean, I've never finished Metroid Prime 3. I've only played like the first 4 hours, so I'm looking forward to the rumored port of that coming to Switch at some point before Metroid Prime 4, because the rumor is that 2 and 3 are also going to come, but they're not going to be as remastered as 1 has been.
Yeah.
I would like to play 3. I think 2, as I've said before on the show, it's Metroid Prime on hard mode. It's longer and harder and more brutal than the first game. But I did enjoy that. Not that I want to play that game again anytime soon.
Yeah.
But I am very excited for Metroid Prime 4. I still think I would like to play the first game, to be honest, this year if I can find a window to play it, because it's been a long time since I've even played that game, even though I played it about 10 years, 12 years after it came out, right, when we started this show. And yeah, I loved Dread. I probably had a better time with Dread than I thought I was going to have, and it is probably my favorite 2D Metroid. It just gets the balance right, so I think Metroid 6 could be a phenomenal game. But yeah, Prime 4 just edges it in terms of my excitement, but they're both still incredibly high up my kind of list of most anticipated Nintendo games.
Yeah, for sure. I'm morbidly fascinated by what they do with Metroid Prime 4, even if I'm not looking forward to it from a personal perspective. I mean, we'll see how I go with the first game this year, right, when I get around to it.
I am very interested, yeah. I think you'll have some rough spots, but it's overall, hopefully have a good time. One recommendation I want to make, and this is something I didn't do, but I saw Liam Robertson on Twitter tweeting about this. He made the point, get the Chozo artifacts. There's like a room you can unlock very near the start that like gives you the clues to where all the artifacts are. Do that early game and at least vaguely attempt to get them along the way, because you don't have, unlike the Triforce pieces in Wind Waker, you don't actually have to do it all at the end. It's just that's the way that a lot of people end up doing it.
Right.
So if you are able to access that room very early on, which he says you can, go there, get the clues, and try and dig around, work out how to get them along the way, and you'll probably have a better time, at least with that aspect.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good tip. I definitely will get to it at some point. I have to.
You have to.
I'm contractually obligated to play it this year, so I will. But
I couldn't have timed it better, because I said, right, Emmy said, this year's the year, and then like 2-3 weeks later, they're just like, oh yeah, stealth dropped Metroid Prime Remastered, so there you go.
Yeah,
just exactly. For you, Emmy said.
Thank you. Yeah, really appreciate that. Very happy. So, yeah, I mean, you know, we're always going to be chatting about Metroid on this show and hyped about Metroid, but I don't like. I'm so fascinated what they do with the new 2D Metroid, given how Dread ends and like what it says about like where they can go from here. Like it is kind of an end cap on like that quote unquote narrative of the 2D Metroid saga. Like the future is very interesting. Of like, what do they do? There are different places they can go with it, and I'm super excited to see what they decide to do with it. So we shall see. And yeah, I think that's probably going to do us, Bal. I think that's going to do us for emails.
Do us.
Thanks everybody for writing in. If you want to write in and we need more emails, Bally, where can they send those to?
Please email ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. And as I said before, there's also the channel over on our Discord server called Emails. We also want your comments, your questions over there.
Absolutely, to send those all in. Cool, we're going to close things out here by going through our usual wrap-up. Of course, we'd like to give big shout-outs and thank yous to the people who support us over on patreon.com. If you go to patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife, you can find some different tiers there to subscribe to and get some bonus content, things from us, if you so please. And Bally would like to thank some folks.
Yes, thank you to our brand new patron, Corey B. We hugely appreciate your support. And thank you to our $10 tier patrons. They are Zach S., Thomas, Matthew, Albert, and Wicked Gamer UK Alan. Thank you all for your $10 tier support. But also thank you to all of our patrons. It's hugely appreciated, the support you give the show. And it really means a lot to us. We really appreciate it.
Let's just dig into interesting little games like Blanc, which we might not otherwise have gotten to, and chat about and get some good discussions. So yeah, absolutely appreciate that. Cool. You can find us all over the internet in different places. The show is available on Spotify. We are on Stitcher. You can download us in any podcasting app that you have. Just search for This Nintendo Life, subscribe and all that good stuff. And you can also review us on those platforms. So you can review us on Apple Podcasts. You can also review us on Spotify, which is easy to do. Just head over to the app. You hit that 5-star button. There's no other stars. 5 is the only one that exists, and you hit that, and that will confirm it for you, and then you go and live your life for the rest of time, leaving us with a nice little Spotify review. So if you're happy to do that, we'd appreciate it, and that would be very, very nice. You can find us in various places on the internet. I am at LordNBZ on Twitter. Where are you, Bally?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. I actually got a play of the game as Baptiste. Can you believe it?
Congratulations. Literally have never seen that in my life before. Because either no one plays as him or it's just like, it's really, as a healer, it's so fucking hard to get play of the game, like impossible. That said, I have gotten a couple of Kiriko play of the games recently, and I've gotten a couple of Symmetra play of the games recently as well.
It seems to really like it when, you get kills that lead to like kill streaks. And then use your healing like at the same time. It seems like there's something about the combination that the player game's like, oh, that was really good. You healed and killed at the same time. Really impressive. So yeah, I'd recommend that. Yeah, just try to do that. It's super easy. That's it. I think that's the end of the show. Cool. I don't know what's going on with you, Bally. What are you going to do now for the next 2 weeks? I just got lots of games to play. Lots of Six Nations to be watching. Love a bit of my rugby. That's exciting. Scotland are still unbeaten at the time of recording, and probably in a few hours we will have lost to France. But that's okay. Well, because we're still in the hunt, even if we lose to France, and that's exciting. Very good. Cool. Well, I'm going to go and play some video games and do some other stuff. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with some more chat around all those types of things and stuff and having a good time. And we will see you very soon. Until then, thank you everybody for listening. Bye-bye, folks. The musical interlude used on today's show was Challenge from Kururin, copyright Nintendo 2001.